Google says the definition of discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior with punishment or other undesired consequences for those that fail to comply. Within just pursuing self-mastery, right? Chasing that 2.0 version of myself over the past 2 years through fitness, through self-improvement, through spirituality, I realize now that there are two forms of discipline that you can attach to within pursuing that best version of yourself. There's mainstream discipline and there's godly discipline. Unfortunately, I see that I and many other young disciplined men end up choosing the mainstream path and thus walking in misalignment from God himself. Falling under this impression and illusion that our disciplined lifestyles are in service of his calling over our lives. But the reality is this: mainstream discipline is rooted in self-righteousness and romanticized as this feature that you have to unlock in order to become masculine, creating this superiority complex and this illusion that you're better than others because you're more disciplined. Exactly why most young men will see someone like David Goggins and they start telling themselves, yeah bro, I gotta take the path of most resistance, forcing themselves to follow certain rules and frameworks and systems to create this image worthy of respect, becoming less of who they are for the sake of achieving more and more discipline. But I and so many other guys out here are building the physiques, we're obtaining the knowledge, right? We're following the routines and the habits, but we're unknowingly sacrificing our souls in the process, more and more detached from our spiritual roots. This is exactly where things like hustle culture, toxic masculinity, and just overall traditional self-help thrive. Mainstream discipline was curated as a way to make you feel fulfilled for the things that you do. Early wake-ups, the long work hours, the intense weightlifting and cardio sessions. None of these are inherently wrong, but when you start doing these things from the lens of needing them to make you feel more disciplined, they become sources of validation and idolization. So when it feels like you're falling off in your fitness, your personal development, your work, or your career, this type of discipline encourages you to do more. Push through the lack of sleep, the systemic fatigue, the chronic soreness and inflammation. More time spent working, more time fixating on achieving your goals, and just more obsession and optimization being injected into your very being, right? Suppressing your heart and soul more and more. The thing is, early on, this type of discipline is actually beneficial and useful because it saves you from living this, autopilot life where you're just going through the motions and you lack organization and structure and just overall purpose and drive within how you operate on a day-to-day basis. As I've experienced over time, it's so easy to become a slave to the pursuit of discipline and taking the path of most resistance as you become more and more attached to the pursuit of self-mastery. That's why now that I see real discipline stems not from what you do, it stems from the type of man that you are relative to being somebody who willingly receives and accepts discipline from God rather than goes out and strives for it. One is based on external performance, the other is based on inner identity. On one hand, you feel this need to punish yourself from deviating from the traditional standards of discipline and masculinity, believing others will view you as less and lose respect for you as soon as you fail to show up perfectly and flawlessly within every single day. Losing any and all feelings of self-worth as soon as you fail to follow the routine, as soon as you miss the workout, as soon as you procrastinate on the work. On the other hand, it's a completely different thing when you can allow a higher power to shape you into a man who willingly receives and accepts that discipline and correction. Trusting that regardless of your inadequacies, regardless of your shortcomings, the desire to discipline yourself will come naturally as opposed to you having to manufacture it out of ego and validation seeking. This way of living goes beyond what you see online, what everybody's talking about in terms of mindset, masculinity, discipline. This is what truly encapsulates the idea of discipline turned into devotion, committing to allowing God to straighten you out instead of you straightening yourself out, leaning on the Most High instead of leaning on your own understanding, giving Him the authority to reveal your flaws and thus signal to you what you need to do to progress and move forward. In a world that romanticizes and just idolizes having that tough, disciplined mindset, this is the path of least resistance, right? The opposite of what David Goggins wants you to do. People hear that and think it's this path completely absent of any suffering or pain or discomfort. Think about this: in the same way that Jesus intentionally suffered for our sins on the cross, taking the path of least resistance is suffering for a higher purpose instead of believing you have to suffer because the world told you so. Taking sacrifices aimed at the greater good instead of just merely seeking external validation and projecting yourself as this disciplined guy. We're all just detaching from the idolization of discipline on its own and understanding that it is a mental asset as part of the foundation that is your spiritual being. Misaligned worldly discipline, it's displayed as the answer. Aligned godly discipline is received as a gift. It's from there that discipline truly becomes devotion. So when it comes to content like this, I wholeheartedly believe that none of what I said actually matters unless you can actually apply it to your own life, your own circumstance. So I'll leave you with what I like to call these actionables for alignment. Be honest and ask yourself whether the things you're disciplining yourself to do are being done from a place of heart and soul, or being done out of ego and validation seeking. In fitness, are you forcing yourself to work out and stress your body more and more when it is screaming for recovery? Within self-improvement, are you obsessing over following the routines and the habits whilst neglecting quality time towards your relationships, right? Your family, your friends. Overall, are you focusing more on doing the things for the sake of being externally disciplined? Or are you actually striving to embody the man internally that willingly receives and accepts discipline from God rather than goes out and tries to achieve it and strive for it on his own? I just believe this is something I'm currently navigating through myself, and thus want you to think about before you go back to living your disciplined life. So if this resonated at all, I'd appreciate hearing your own experiences with discipline, how it plays into your own pursuit of self-mastery, your own journey within becoming that 2.0 version of yourself. First, because it's YouTube, like, subscribe. Real note, just join along on this current 365-day commitment of mine that I'm doing, right? What I'm calling 365 Align, where I'm essentially just allowing God to align me mentally, physically, and spiritually towards the highest version of myself, right? That 2.0 version of me. Nonetheless, wish you the best within your own mental, physical, and spiritual endeavors. Say align.